She called the police over the smell of barbecue, not knowing it was a memorial for a local hero. "They're smoking something illegal. I can smell it from my kitchen." That was the 911 call that started it all, placed by a woman with pearl earrings and an HOA badge pinned to her vest. Her name was Karen. Yes, really? What she smelled wasn't drugs. It was hickory, mesquite, slow-cooked ribs marinated in molasses and memory. What she heard wasn't a party. It was a neighborhood's heartbeat, echoing from an old radio, the kind that still played Marvin Gaye and war broadcasts. And what she disrupted wasn't a backyard barbecue. It was a memorial for Sergeant Anthony Ray Duncan. On the last Saturday of June, in a small urban park off 47th Street, the Duncan family had gathered for their annual remembrance. It had been 9 years since Tony died overseas, but every year, on the same patch of grass he used to run across as a boy, they lit the coals, set the table, and honored him with stories, music, and the food he loved. He was 28 when he died. A combat medic, a big laugh, a bigger heart, and the kind of man who'd give you his last bite before he ever thought of eating it himself. This was his neighborhood. This was his family. And this smoke? It was sacred. Jeremiah Duncan, Tony's father, had arrived at sunrise. He'd parked his old pickup by the curb, carried out his rusted smoker by hand, and began the slow ritual. 2 briskets, 3 racks of ribs, chicken thighs soaked overnight. He wore Tony's old army t-shirt and a dog tag that hadn't left his neck in 9 years. The music started around 10. The family brought folding chairs, paper plates, red soda in glass bottles. Kids ran barefoot in the grass. Neighbors brought potato salad and pound cake. Some wore t-shirts with Tony's picture. Others just came to stand in silence and offer a nod to the man who had meant so much. And then came the cops. 3 squad cars. Lights but no sirens. An officer stepped out, hand on his belt, and approached Jeremiah. "Sir, we got a complaint about illegal activity." Jeremiah didn't look up. He was basting ribs. "Illegal ribs?" "There's smoke, sir. Loud music." The caller mentioned drug use. Jeremiah turned slowly, looked the officer dead in the eyes, and pointed with the basting brush toward the laminated photo of his son pinned to the oak tree beside the grill. "You see that boy?" The officer glanced. "Yes, sir. That's Sergeant Anthony Duncan. Served 2 tours. Saved 12 men before bleeding out in a ditch in Kandahar. This," he said, motioning toward the smoke, "is his memory." The officer cleared his throat. His partner walked up, looked around, noted the food, the folded flag, the banner reading Annual Tony Duncan Memorial Barbecue. Something clicked. They backed off. But it was too late. The neighbors had seen. The children had stopped playing. Jeremiah stood there, not in defiance, but in grief sharpened into steel, and the meat began to burn. Across the street, Karen watched from behind her rosebush, lips pursed, phone still in her hand. Someone recorded it. Of course. Not the beginning, not the call, but the aftermath. The moment Jeremiah wiped his hands on his apron and said, "If honoring my son is a disturbance, maybe y'all should disturb some history books." The clip went viral by nightfall. "Barbecue Karen calls cops on Black Memorial," the caption read. The comments poured in. The outrage, the disbelief, but beneath it all, the same old ache. Because this wasn't just one woman calling the cops. It was every quiet disrespect, every denied permit, every time a community tried to honor their own and got treated like trespassers on their own block. Jeremiah didn't read the comments, but he got the calls. Old army buddies, journalists, the mayor's office. They all wanted statements, sound bites, quotes. He ignored them all until one call came through from a number he hadn't seen in years. "Jeremiah?" The voice rasped. He froze. "Lieutenant Hayes?" The man coughed. "You think I'd miss a Tony Duncan barbecue? Even if it's a war zone back home?" Hayes arrived 2 days later. With him came 2 other veterans, men who had served with Tony. One had lost a leg, another his speech, but they stood beside Jeremiah, wearing their old uniforms, and said nothing as reporters shouted questions. They didn't need words. The next Saturday, the park was full again, not just with family, but with people who'd never even met Tony. Veterans, activists, students, city council members, a marching band from the high school Tony once walked past every day. And Jeremiah? He grilled. Same smoker, same rhythm. This time with 2 police officers helping serve the food volunteers who had come on their day off, wearing t-shirts that said Duncan Day, honor over fear. Karen didn't come outside, but a letter arrived a few days later, dropped anonymously on Jeremiah's porch. I didn't know who he was. I just smelled smoke. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to explain his worth. I was wrong. There was no name. But the handwriting was delicate, familiar. Jeremiah sat on the porch, the note in hand, and exhaled. Long quiet. Then, without a word, he walked to the grill, placed the letter beside the folded photo of Tony, and lit a fresh batch of coals. This wasn't over. This would never be over. Because every year someone new would need to learn what that smoke really meant. The fire was lit again the next weekend. This time, Jeremiah wasn't alone behind the grill. Luis, Tony's childhood friend who now ran a food truck, showed up at dawn with 4 crates of corn, sweet peppers, and marinated jackfruit. You held it down last week, OG, he said, bumping fists with Jeremiah. Let's make it a block party. That day something changed. Neighbors who had never spoken more than a polite nod began pulling chairs from their garages. A teenager brought out his drum kit. A woman with a saxophone joined in, playing a slow, aching version of America the Beautiful. A Korean War veteran named Mr. Shim brought photos of his own fallen sons and asked quietly, "May I place these next to Tony?" Jeremiah nodded. Every soldier's welcome. The smell of hickory drifted again. But this time it wasn't just food, it was signal. Message. Tribute. You could smell it 3 blocks over and know something sacred was happening here. But not everyone was pleased. 2 members of the HOA approached Jeremiah by the grill. One was Mr. Langford, pale, pinched lips, clipboard in hand. The other, Ms. Sloan, wore a golf visor and the permanent expression of someone sucking on a lemon. "Mr. Duncan," Langford began, clearing his throat. "There's been concern raised over the growing nature of your gatherings." "Concern from who?" Langford coughed. "We don't name names." Sloan stepped in. "This is a residential area, not a community center. You don't have a permit for amplified sound, nor for food distribution." Jeremiah wiped his hands and looked at them both. "I'm not distributing food. I'm sharing it. With neighbors. With veterans. With children who never got to meet Tony but eat his ribs like it's Holy Communion." Langford frowned. "Still, technically, the bylaws—" "I wrote the bylaws," said a voice from behind them. It was Linda Carter, a retired judge and one of the oldest residents on the block. She stood with her walker, firm as stone. "I helped draft this neighborhood charter in 1982, and there's nothing in there against remembering our dead." Langford opened his mouth, then closed it. "Unless," she added, "you're suggesting patriotism has a curfew?" They retreated. The next day, the local news ran the headline, "Barbecue Memorial faces HOA threats, veterans and neighbors push back." It only made the gatherings grow. Soon, Elijah Carter, the same man who had once fought HOA racism in another neighborhood, sent word through his grandson Jordan. "Tell Mr. Duncan that porches and parks are sacred. And if he needs backup, I'll bring my chair and my banner." Jeremiah chuckled when he read the message. The porch rebellion's spreading. But he also knew trouble would come again. And it did. 2 weeks later, he received an official HOA warning letter. Fined $1,200 for exceeding noise levels, operating an unlicensed event, and creating potential fire hazards. The letter was signed by Karen, full name now revealed as Karen Whitmore, HOA compliance chair. Jeremiah read the letter twice, folded it neatly, and placed it beside his son's folded flag. That night, he made a decision. He called Jordan. "You still know any of those civil rights lawyers your grandpa worked with?" "I do," Jordan said. "You want to fight?" "No," Jeremiah replied. "I want to teach." He called a neighborhood meeting at the park. More than 60 people showed up. Black, white, Asian, Latino, veterans, grandparents, high schoolers, even 2 city council members. Jeremiah stood on a crate and spoke softly, but clearly. I've been smoking ribs for my son every summer since he died. Never once needed a permit to grieve. Never asked for permission to remember. But now they say it's too loud, too smoky, too black, too proud. Well, I say this park doesn't belong to the HOA, it belongs to all of us. Cheers erupted. We're going to file a formal counterclaim. We're going to challenge the fine. And while we're at it, we're going to demand an amendment to the HOA charter protecting memorials like this one. For every Gold Star family. For every veteran. For every lost voice they tried to muffle. Someone yelled, "Damn right!" And Jeremiah held up the warning letter like it was kindling. I won't burn this. Not yet. But if they keep trying to erase my son, they'll see what real fire looks like. The community mobilized. 2 law students from Howard volunteered to help file the brief. Local organizers began collecting signatures. Luis Printed let him smoke t-shirts and sold out in a day. Even the local American Legion chapter issued a statement of support. Karen was silent, but her lawyer responded with a counterclaim, arguing that emotional appeals should not override neighborhood standards and that uniformity protects property values. That sentence, uniformity protects property values, was quoted in a dozen newspapers as the epitome of quiet bigotry. The court hearing was set for July 22nd. 2 days before, Jeremiah received a visitor. It was Reverend Miles, Tony's childhood pastor, now frail and nearly blind. He placed a hand on Jeremiah's shoulder and said, I remember when you taught Tony how to tie his shoes. You told him, don't ever let them tell you this ground ain't yours. Jeremiah smiled sadly. He listened. The Reverend pressed something into his palm. A bronze pin, shaped like a flame, the insignia of their old church, once burned down during the 60s protests. Take this with you, the Reverend said. Justice needs a little fire. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Karen sat on one side, lips tight, flanked by 3 HOA attorneys in matching gray suits. Jeremiah sat on the other in his Sunday best, holding Tony's flag, the bronze pin on his lapel, and behind him, neighbors, veterans, children, even a few former critics who had changed their minds after walking by the park and seeing the love behind the smoke. Jordan, dressed sharply in a navy suit, stood to deliver the opening argument. He began not with law, but with a photograph, a close-up of Tony's smiling face, smoke rising behind him from a barbecue grill in Kandahar. He cooked for his brothers in the desert, Jordan said, voice steady. Now his father cooks for him. The judge listened. Karen's lawyers argued ordinances, zoning codes, noise limits, but when Jeremiah was called to the stand, he didn't bring a defense. He brought a story about the boy who used to chase fireflies in the same park, about the soldier who volunteered for a second tour to protect a fellow medic, about the ribs he loved, sticky, messy, joyful. He died with a photo of this park in his pocket, Jeremiah said, and every year, I give him a little piece of home back. Silence fell. The judge, an older black woman named Judge Hernandez, leaned forward. I have lived on this earth long enough to smell the difference between smoke meant to hurt and smoke meant to heal, she said. And then she ruled. Fine dismissed. Memorials protected. Charter to be amended. The room erupted. Tears. Hugs. Applause. Karen stood and walked out quietly. Outside, someone handed Jeremiah a fresh t-shirt that read "Smoke is sacred." He laughed. He hadn't laughed like that in years. Jeremiah thought things might settle down after the ruling. But justice doesn't just quiet a storm, it shifts the sky. Within days, messages flooded in. Veteran groups from Georgia, Texas, and Pennsylvania reached out, asking for advice on how to protect their own community memorials. A neighborhood association in New Jersey invited Jeremiah to speak. You turned a barbecue into a blueprint, one email read. But Jeremiah didn't care about becoming a symbol. He was just glad Tony's memory was safe again. Then the letters started coming. Not emails. Real letters. Dozens. Then hundreds. Handwritten. Typed. Sometimes barely legible through smudged ink and tear stains. A woman in Arkansas wrote, "My father died in '71. We never held a memorial because the city said we needed a parade permit. We waited. Then we forgot. But after reading about Tony, we're lighting a fire this Sunday. Thank you for the reminder." A 13-year-old boy from Baltimore wrote, "I didn't know my big brother. He died in Afghanistan when I was a baby. But I saw your video in school and asked my mom if we could make ribs for him. She said yes. I want to be like you when I grow up." Jeremiah read each letter in silence, placing them carefully in a wooden box labeled Tony's Fire. Jordan began helping him archive them. "We should publish these," he said. "It's a movement now." But Jeremiah shook his head. "It's not mine to publish. It's theirs to carry." Despite the wave of support, Karen Whitmore didn't disappear. 2 weeks after the court ruling, she filed a formal complaint to the HOA board claiming that Jeremiah had politicized community space, and that the ruling encouraged chaos and deviation from order. The board didn't act, but a whisper campaign began. Some neighbors who once nodded now avoided eye contact. A printed flyer showed up in a few mailboxes. "Keep the peace, not the smoke." Jeremiah didn't respond publicly. He just did what he always did. Woke early, prepped the grill, remembered his son. But the lines were being redrawn. And the next escalation didn't come from the HOA, it came from fire. Late one night, someone lit the memorial banner on fire. Jeremiah found it the next morning, melted fabric, charred edges. Tony's face blackened but not erased. The pole had fallen sideways like a snapped spine. Ash coated the sidewalk. He didn't call the police. He called Luis. Together, they hung a new banner by noon. Bigger, brighter. The new design featured Tony's photo on one side and a quote on the other. They tried to burn his memory, but they only fed the flame. The photo went viral again. And this time, the mayor called him personally. "We want to honor Tony officially," she said. "Not just with a street name or plaque, but with a permanent memorial in the park. A grill station, a bronze plaque, a table with his story etched in steel." Jeremiah hesitated. "I never did this for that," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why you deserve it." The city council approved the proposal unanimously. The mayor declared August 17th, Tony's birthday, as Sergeant Anthony Duncan Day. On the morning of the unveiling, the entire neighborhood turned out. Even those who once stayed silent. Even those who had whispered about smoke and permits. Children held small American flags. Veterans lined the path. Journalists set up cameras. A youth choir sang, "Lift every voice and sing." And Jeremiah stood under the oak tree, holding his son's folded flag, beside a freshly mounted steel plaque that read, "He served with honor. He died with courage. He is remembered with fire and with love. Let no one mistake this smoke for anything but reverence." Luis unveiled the grill station, custom built with brick and brass. It had Tony's initials etched into the side. People clapped. Some wept. A young man in uniform saluted and stayed frozen in place for nearly a minute before Jeremiah gently lowered his hand. Karen was not there, but her absence no longer held power. After the event, as the crowd thinned and the press wandered off, an elderly white man approached Jeremiah slowly. "I'm Harold Whitmore," he said. "Karen's husband." Jeremiah stayed silent. She's ashamed, but she doesn't know how to say it. "I came because she couldn't." Jeremiah nodded once, slowly. Harold pulled something from his jacket. A sealed envelope. "She wrote this months ago. Was too proud to mail it. I think it's time." Jeremiah took it but didn't open it. "I'm sorry for what she did," Harold said. "I really am. She just didn't understand what you were building." "She still doesn't," Jeremiah replied quietly. "But thank you for coming." That night, Jeremiah opened the letter alone on the porch. Inside, Karen had written, "I watched the fire from my window. First I was angry, then confused, then ashamed. I thought silence was safety. I thought rules were fairness. I was wrong. The day I saw your son's name on that banner, I remembered a boy from my high school who never came back from Vietnam. He looked like Tony. He had eyes like yours. I didn't speak up for him either. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope the smoke reminds me next time. Not everything loud is a threat. Sometimes it's a prayer. There was no signature. Just K. Jeremiah folded the letter, placed it in Tony's box, and whispered, "Amen." Weeks later, something unexpected happened. A group of high school students asked Jeremiah if they could do a documentary on him, not just about Tony, but about memory itself. "We want to interview people about how they grieve, how they honor, and what gets in the way," one girl said. "You taught us something real, that grief isn't quiet, and remembrance doesn't need permission." Jeremiah agreed. He spoke softly on camera, about Tony, about the smoke, about the weight of silence. The film premiered at the local library 3 months later. And in the final scene shot from behind, Jeremiah sat alone at the grill, smoke rising, sun setting, children laughing in the background. The camera zoomed in on the plaque beside him. The screen faded to black, and the final words appeared. "Grief needs space. Love needs noise. Heroes need flame." The documentary, Smoke is Sacred, made its rounds quietly, at first screened at the community library, then picked up by a regional PBS affiliate. But word of mouth proved stronger than marketing. Teachers began showing it in schools during Black History Month. Veteran support groups asked to host viewings. Civic groups held community dialogues afterward, asking questions like, "What memories are we erasing with silence?" And "Who gets to grieve out loud?" Jeremiah received letters again. But this time, they weren't only stories of loss, they were invitations to collaborate, to build. In Detroit, a retired Marine started Grill and Grieve, a support circle for Gold Star families to cook together. In Tulsa, a school replaced its damaged war memorial with a new one designed by students inspired by Jeremiah's steel plaque. And in rural Alabama, a high school senior wrote her college admissions essay on the barbecue memorial. She called it, "The Day Smoke Taught Me to Listen." Jeremiah never sought the spotlight, but it found him all the same. And with it came responsibility, the kind that doesn't weigh you down but gives your steps meaning. One afternoon, Jordan returned to the park with news. He had passed the bar. Offers were already coming in from top firms. Jeremiah shook his hand, then pulled him in for a hug. "You're not just a lawyer," he said. "You're a witness. Don't forget who you're speaking for." Jordan smiled. "I was thinking of starting a foundation, something small at first. Maybe the Tony Duncan Initiative. Help communities protect public memorials. Teach kids how to document their neighborhood heroes before they're forgotten." Jeremiah looked off toward the banner fluttering in the wind. "Do it. Just make sure you build it slow. Like ribs. Like trust." That weekend, they hosted what would become the largest barbecue memorial yet. 5 grills. Hundreds of people. Local businesses donated food. A jazz band played all afternoon. Council members gave speeches, but only after Jeremiah gave his blessing. "No one speaks before the fire's lit," he told them with a grin. At sundown, candles were passed around. The crowd stood in silence, flickering light surrounding the bronze plaque, now polished by years of fingers and rainfall. Jeremiah stepped forward and addressed the crowd one final time. "My son didn't die so we could whisper. He died so we could remember." He paused, then added, "And if smoke is all I have left of him, then I'll light this fire every day until I join him." There were tears, not just from family, not just from veterans, from people who had never known Tony, people who had never grieved publicly, who had been taught their grief was too loud, too inconvenient, too disruptive. That night, for the first time, the mayor proposed something radical. "We want to rename the park," she said. "Not just a corner or a plaque. The entire space." She looked to Jeremiah. "Would you allow us to name it the Sergeant Anthony R. Duncan Memorial Park?" Jeremiah was silent. Then he said, "Only if we leave room for more names." The city agreed. They installed a second plaque a month later, blank, save for an inscription across the top. To all the sons and daughters remembered with fire. Add their names. Share their smoke. Jeremiah's health began to slow. His knees creaked. His breaths came shorter. But his mind stayed sharp. He continued mentoring young organizers, answering letters, and helping local families write their own memorial ordinances. One boy named Malik, whose older sister had died in combat, asked him, "Do you think they'll ever stop needing people like you?" Jeremiah smiled. "Only when they stop forgetting people like her." One autumn morning, Jeremiah didn't come to the park. The smoker sat cold, the folding chair empty. Jordan came to check on him. He found Jeremiah on the porch, peacefully gone, dog tags still around his neck, a folded apron in his lap, and a handwritten note tucked beside a bottle of barbecue sauce. Jordan read the note aloud through tears. "If you're reading this, I've gone to see Tony. Don't mourn too long. Light the fire. Pass the plate. And if anyone complains about the smell, just tell them. It's what remembrance tastes like." The funeral drew hundreds. Police escorts. Military honors. A 21-gun salute echoed over the park. But perhaps the most moving tribute came afterward, when dozens of neighborhood grills lit up all at once, smoke rising like incense into the crisp fall sky. Some cooked ribs. Others grilled tofu. A few just lit coals and sat in silence. But across each fire was the same sign, handwritten or printed. "Remember with flame." Jordan gave the eulogy. He didn't talk about the battles Jeremiah won. He talked about the way he'd stand in front of a grill for hours, never once leaving it unattended, because you don't rush the good stuff. He talked about the way Jeremiah spoke of grief as something to carry together like a heavy pot at a family cookout. And he ended with the words, "Smoke rises, so does memory, so will we." The foundation was launched a month later. The Tony and Jeremiah Initiative. They offered grants to communities holding non-traditional memorials, block parties, storytelling circles, porch concerts. They trained local teens to document oral histories of veterans and elders. And they published a yearly book called Names in the Smoke, filled with submitted stories from across the country. Karen never rejoined the HOA board. But one day, she showed up quietly to a community event with a tray of cornbread and a folded newspaper article about her own father, long forgotten by the town that sent him to war. She didn't speak, but she left the cornbread beside the grill and placed the article into the memorial box. Luis nodded at her. "You're welcome back, you know?" She nodded once. "I know." By the 10th anniversary of Tony's death, the park had transformed. The grills were permanent. The plaques, now dozens wrapped around the old oak tree like armor. Kids played tag between benches engraved with stories. The barbecue smoke still rose each summer. And whenever someone new asked what it was all about, someone nearby, an auntie, a student, a councilman, a neighbor, would simply say, "This is memory. This is defiance. This is love on fire." The end.